Hello. We're going to be taking some notes today. If you have your literary terms packet, take it out. You can just follow along and fill out the definitions, listen to some explanations. Pause the video if you need more time to copy the definitions down. Our first short story is going to be an episode of The Twilight Zone, and we're going to be focusing on plot. This is a perfect story to focus on plot because it's an old TV show and it just perfectly follows that formula of the plot diagram which we're going to discuss today. Okay, so here we go. Plot. You probably heard it before. When we filled out that map, we mapped out Salva's journey. There was a question on the bottom that said something like, after filling this out, after completing this assignment, what did you create? You created a summary, right? You summarized Salva's journey. And what did you summarize? You summarized the plot, because plot is the sequence of events in a story. Okay? This happens, then this happens, and then this happens. This character goes there, this character goes there. These are plot points. These are the events of a plot, the sequence of events in a story. Okay? Again, pause it to copy down. I'm going to keep moving. Here's a plot diagram. This is just sort of a visual interpretation of plot. And we didn't cover conflict yet, but right here, as the definition later on will say, every story has to have a conflict. So without a conflict, you don't really have a story. A conflict is a problem, right? We know the word conflict is like an argument or a fight. But it just, in literature, it means the problem that arises in a story. And you have to have a conflict to have a story. It can be very major, like thinking about those popular Marvel movies. They have to save the universe from that big bad guy, what's his name, Thanos. That is a very major problem, but it's still a problem. That's the conflict of the story. It can be very minor, like, this character needs to get new shoes before, he or she goes to the dance tonight. It's a minor problem, but it's still a problem. It needs to be overcome. That's the conflict. Every story has to have a conflict. But we'll start at the beginning. And exposition is essentially the beginning of a story. The introduction of a story. It describes the characters, the setting. It gives the reader any important background information. Okay? Pause the video to copy. And if you're thinking about, we'll think about A Long Walk to Water throughout this, note-taking process, because it's a good reference point, because we've all read it, or at least we were supposed to read it. So what is the exposition of A Long Walk to Water? Well, before I get there, exposition in stories we love, in stories that we can get into right away, usually the exposition is short. Usually we get right to the problem and we're off into the story. Stories that are more difficult to get into, they might have longer expositions. Nothing's really happening. I'm 8 chapters in, what's going to happen, right? That's the exposition, the beginning of the story. So if we're thinking about A Long Walk to Water, we love that story. One of the reasons why is because it gets right into the story. After chapter 1, boom, we have our conflict and we're off to the races. And what's the exposition of A Long Walk to Water? Well, in chapter 1, we're taking place in Sudan, southern Sudan to be exact. We have 2 different timelines, right? Salva's in the 80s. Naya is like 2006, I think. We're introduced to Salva. He's in his village. He's in a school. He's daydreaming, so we know he's a good student because he already knows the lesson and he's daydreaming. He's daydreaming about going home and seeing his mom. His mom's going to make him some milk. He's thinking about his dad and how he's an important member of the community. He's thinking about his brothers and his sisters and how they rely on each other and help each other and how they go to school and some stay home. And we're getting a lot of background information about his family. This is all sort of setting the table for the story. And of course, we don't really learn much about Naya in the beginning. It's just that she's a young girl in southern Sudan, and she walks to water, okay? Which takes us to our rising action. Rising action is the conflict, the part of the story where the conflict is introduced, the drama intensifies, and the characters become more involved with the conflict. These events build up to the climax, okay? So the conflict is introduced. If you're thinking about A Long Walk to Water, somebody attacks, not somebody, the northern government attacks Salva's village, his school, and run into the bush, get away. That's her problem. Survival and being reunited with your family. Now we have a conflict, right? So after that conflict is introduced, now we're in the rising action. And you can feel in a good story it building and building and building and building. Okay? Like this picture of a roller coaster here. So if we're thinking about A Long Walk to Water, what happens in this story? Okay, he runs into the bush. He meets a group of people. He gets left behind. He meets another group of people. He meets Mariel, who gets eaten by a lion. He meets his uncle, who later gets killed. He, makes it to a Tang refugee camp, only to be pushed out across the river that's filled with crocodiles. He walks across the desert to reach a Tang refugee camp. All of these are part of the rising action. You can feel it intensifying. You can feel the story building, the drama building, up and up and up, like you're on a roller coaster. Which takes us to our climax. The tip of the mountain, the height of the story. The climax is the most intense, the most exciting and important part of a story. It's the turning point. It's usually when the conflict is resolved. And if you think about this as like a checklist, right? Because this is like 3 different definitions essentially. And the word intense and exciting and important, that's kind of a matter of opinion. What is important to me might not be that important to you. What's exciting to me is not that exciting to you, right? So it's kind of subjective, like anything in life, in English class in particular. You have to, if you say, I think the climax is this, okay, tell me why. Why is that the climax? And if you give me a good argument, I'd be like, okay, yeah, I can see that. Maybe I don't agree with you, but it fits that, definition. So yeah, maybe it's the climax. But in a good story, most of us would agree on, what the climax is. And again, it's like a checklist. Is it the most exciting and important part of the story? Yeah, it seems pretty exciting. Is it the turning point? Is the conflict resolved? Well, no, maybe not. Okay, so that's not your climax. Is it intense and exciting? Yeah, check. Is it the turning point? It seems like it. Check. Is the conflict resolved? Yeah, it is. Okay, then that's my climax. Okay. Again, pause the video if you need to write this down. Climax. I would argue that the climax of A Long Walk to Water is when he decides or is chosen to go to America, and Sal was chosen to go to America. Some would argue that it's when he's reunited with his father, which I would buy. I could see that. I think it's when he goes to America because, at that point, he's basically given up on being reunited with his family. He doesn't think that it's going to happen. He's been given the opportunity to go to America. He's accepted this. He's moving on. As the reader, we know that Salva is safe. So, it's the problem is resolved. He survived. He's safe. It's the turning point of the story. That's what I would say. That's the climax. Which takes us to our falling action, which is all of the events that happen after the climax that bring the story to a resolution. Again, pause if you need to. But falling action, it's not that complicated. It's everything that happens after the climax, but before the ending. So if we're thinking about A Long Walk to Water, he gets to America. He meets his new family. He's assimilating to this country. He's learning a language. He's going to school. He's playing volleyball. He gets an email from his cousin. He reunites with his father. His father gives him that idea, to start his organization to build wells for people in Sudan. All of this is the falling action, which takes us to our resolution, which is a fancy word for the end. The part of the story that explains that everything is turns out in the end. Not always, super clear. Not always everything is so neatly tied up in a nice bow. That's not always they all lived happily ever after. right? But it's the ending of the story. The author has landed the plane, has taken you to where he or she wants you to be, and that's the resolution. And if we're talking about A Long Walk to Water, which we are, I think it's pretty clear after all this that the resolution is, in Naya's village, they're celebrating. Their water is pumping. They're drinking. They're spilling it. They're splashing it around, and people. Not people. I got distracted. Sorry. Naya walks up to that man and says, "Hey, thank you for bringing water to my village. My name is Naya. I wanted to thank you." "Oh, nice to meet you. My name is Salva." It's amazing. And that's the end. That's the resolution. Okay? If you think about in class today, I always bring up the example of Finding Nemo, something most students are familiar with. The thing about Finding Nemo, we use that plot diagram. I'll go back here. I think you can see my arrow, right? So exposition in Finding Nemo. Marlin is a fish, and his family is eaten by predators. There's only one egg that remains, and that is, of course, Nemo. This is important information. This is background information we need to know. This is the exposition because, now that we know this is his only, surviving child, the stakes are much higher later on when we get to our problem. So that's our exposition. We know Marlin. He's a little bit nervous, maybe neurotic, overprotective, and then we meet Nemo, who is, cute and playful, curious. He's got a lucky fin. Then, of course, our conflict. It's in the title. He runs across the reef, to the edge. He touches the boat, but gets kidnapped by that scuba diver. So there's your conflict. There's your problem. We have to find Nemo. It's right in the title. So there's our conflict. Rising action. I'm not going to do it in the right order, but so if we're following Marlin, Marlin is our protagonist. We're following Marlin. He meets Dory. They come across the sharks that are sort of, not wanting to eat meat, but they can't, resist. The jellyfish, Dory gets stung by jellyfish and Marlin rescues her. The anglerfish that has that little light bulb thing on its head, and where they get the mask for P. Sherman 42 Wallaby Way, Sydney, Australia. The whales, right? Dory sees the whales. She speaks whale. The fish who are like spelling out messages. What else? I guess eventually they get to, the turtles take them to Sydney, Australia, and the pelican takes them, up to the window. Then we have a climax. What's our climax of the story? Well, guess what? Marlin has found Nemo. They're reunited. That's our climax. That's the height of the story. That the conflict is resolved, right? Climax. Okay. Well, then what happens in the falling action? Not many people remember this part, but they get caught up in the fishing net, swim down, and they get out. This is, your falling action until you get to your resolution. It's a Disney Pixar movie. So obviously they all lived happily ever after. Dory's going to stay with them. Nemo is, going to go to school. And Marlin has chilled out a bit. He doesn't have to be so overbearing. The end, right? So that's how it works. That's plot, different parts of plot. We have one more definition, dialogue. Again, the story we're going to read is the transcript or the script for an episode of TV. So it's mostly dialogue. There's a little bit of stage direction, but it's mostly dialogue. Dialogue is the conversation between characters in a story. Okay? Stories don't have to have dialogue, but they usually are more interesting with dialogue. It's usually what makes the story pop. It's usually what's making it more interesting. We get to know more about the characters and their personalities. They can push the story along as well. Again, you don't need it, but it usually, when you like a story, a lot of times the reason why you like it is because the dialogue is good, because it seems real. These characters seem real. And again, you get personality. This character is funny. This character is sarcastic. This character is from here because is written in a certain way. It just makes the story come alive. Okay? When an author writes dialogue, there's a few things that they do, but most importantly, they use quotation marks around the actual words that are coming out of the mouth of the character, right? Moana argued, okay, first, I'm not a princess, I'm a daughter of a chief. We know that that's what Moana is saying because it's in quotation marks. We can change the inflection in her voice, et cetera, et cetera. Same difference, Maui replied. So again, quotation marks let us know. These are the actual words of the characters. And it's important to have quotation marks. It's important to also have the proper formatting of having a new paragraph every time a character speaks, because if you didn't, as you can see here, it's very confusing. Janice says, that one there, that's Karen Smith. She is one of the dumbest girls you'll ever meet. Damien sat next to her in English last year. She asked me how to spell orange. Damien adds. Katie laughs. Janice continues, that little one, we have no idea what's going on. Who is saying what? Who is stopping? Who is starting, right? If we have quotation marks, if we have new paragraphs every time a new character speaks, well, then, of course, it's much easier to process and understand. Okay? So punctuation, formatting does matter. All right, so that's it. Those are today's notes. Next week, we'll read our story. The monsters will do on Maple Street. All right? Thank you. Bye.